Imagine this. You're standing in front of a mirror, staring into your own eyes. The room is silent, still, but the longer you look, the more something begins to feel off. It's not the mirror that's broken. It's something behind your eyes. A flicker. A presence. Like someone else is looking back at you. And for the first time, you realize maybe the person you've been pretending to be isn't who you really are. Now ask yourself this. What have you buried so deep within your psyche that even you can no longer see it? There's a part of you that doesn't want to be noticed. A part that hides in the dark corners of your consciousness, just out of reach. It's not the version of you that's polished, presentable, and praised. It's the raw, chaotic, impulsive you. The you that doesn't care what people think. The you that remembers pain you pretended to forget. The you that's angry, jealous, bitter, lustful, terrified. Carl Jung called this buried part the shadow. It isn't evil. It isn't wrong. It's just unseen. And yet, despite living in the dark, your shadow never stops moving. It whispers in your thoughts. It fuels your addictions. It chooses your lovers. It explodes in your anger. It breaks your heart, sabotages your goals, and convinces you it was never there in the first place. You think you're making conscious choices, but often it's the shadow that's driving. Think of the moments you've lost control, the words you swore you'd never say, the feelings you weren't supposed to have, the way you shrink around authority, or manipulate someone you love, or scroll endlessly through distractions while a deeper part of you begs to be seen. What if those weren't random lapses in judgment? What if they were messages from a self you've never dared to meet? You've been taught your whole life to repress anything that doesn't fit the mold. Don't be too angry. Don't be too sad. Don't be too loud. Don't be too much. So you pushed it all down, smiled when you were dying inside, nodded when you wanted to scream, played nice while your soul curled in on itself. But nothing buried ever truly disappears. It waits. And over time, it rots. That's the paradox. The more you try to control your darker impulses to silence your shadow, the more control it gains over you. Because what you do not own owns you. As Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you'll call it fate. How many people go through life thinking they're free, while secretly being puppeteered by fears, traumas and patterns they never dared to look at? You can run from your past. You can pretend you've healed. You can convince yourself you've moved on. But the shadow doesn't care what story you tell yourself. It watches, it waits. And when the mask slips during a fight, a breakdown, a heartbreak, it takes the wheel. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The parts of you that you hate, deny, or ignore, those are often the very keys to your power. Not your positive thinking, not your forced gratitude, not the carefully curated persona you wear like armor, but the hidden self, raw, messy, real. That's where the transformation lives. Jung didn't just diagnose the human condition. He offered a mirror. And in that mirror, he showed us that wholeness isn't found in light alone. It's found by facing the dark without flinching. But very few ever do. Most people are terrified of what they'll find. What if you're not who you thought you were? What if the villain in your story is you? What if everything you blamed on the world, your failed relationships, your self-sabotage, your emotional numbness, was actually your shadow acting out its pain? What if the thing you fear the most is the part of yourself you need the most? Imagine unlocking all that repressed rage, sorrow, and shame, and instead of letting it destroy you, you let it transform you. Not into a monster, but into someone finally whole. Can you even begin to fathom what that would feel like? Before you can answer that, you must face a much harder question one most never ask. If your shadow is real, who have you really been all this time? That's where we go next. Because understanding the shadow isn't just about exploring the psyche. It's about uncovering the silent war that's been raging inside you your entire life, between who you think you are and the parts you refuse to face. And until that war ends, you will never truly be free. There's a saying in ancient alchemy, as above, so below. As within, so without. But what happens when what's within you is something you've never met? The modern world teaches you to seek answers outside of your self-therapy. Productivity hacks, success formulas, spiritual bypassing disguised as self-care. But all of it circles around one unspoken fear. What will happen if I actually look at myself without flinching? This is the hidden problem. You are not broken because you feel too much, think too deeply, or carry too many contradictions. You are fragmented because you've been taught to amputate parts of your soul in exchange for approval. You were never taught to integrate, only to suppress. Carl Jung understood this more than most. In his view, the psyche isn't just a collection of thoughts and behaviors, it's a battlefield. A war between the conscious persona you present to the world and the unconscious forces you refuse to acknowledge. At the center of that conflict is the shadow, everything you've disowned, denied, or been shamed into hiding. But why is it there? Why is there even such a thing as a shadow? Because society doesn't reward authenticity. It rewards conformity. From childhood, you were conditioned to fit into a mold, obedient, productive, socially acceptable. Every time you were punished for crying, ignored for being too excited, or told that good boys don't get angry or nice girls don't speak out, you received a message. This part of you is not lovable. So you split. You buried the parts of yourself that were inconvenient, wild, or vulnerable. You wore a mask to survive. And over time, that mask hardened into identity. But make no mistake, those disowned parts didn't die. They simply moved underground. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality." For no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. Because confronting your shadow means unlearning everything you've been taught to believe about yourself. And that's not just psychologically uncomfortable. It's existentially shattering. Philosophers like Nietzsche and Dostoevsky echoed the same dilemma in different words. Nietzsche spoke of the will to power not as domination, but as the radical responsibility to become who you truly are, even if that means embracing your chaos. He warned of becoming too tame, too civilized, too comfortable in herd morality, where virtue is just obedience in disguise. Dostoevsky, in Notes from Underground, portrayed the human soul not as pure or noble, but as twisted, contradictory, irrational. His underground man wasn't a villain, he was a mirror. A man aware of his own bitterness, his cowardice, his hatred, and yet clinging to it, because at least it was real. Real, that's the word. The modern self is rarely that. We curate, edit, polish, filter until there's nothing left but a ghost who smiles on command. But somewhere beneath that ghost lies the real you, complete with your unmet rage, unprocessed trauma, forbidden desires, and unfulfilled longing. This is not a flaw. It's a map. Because the shadow isn't just a vault of ugliness, it's the hidden repository of your potential, your creativity, your assertiveness, your sensuality, your truth, all buried with your shame. Gabor Maté, one of the most respected voices in trauma psychology, explains that in childhood, we face a painful dilemma: attachment or authenticity. If being authentic, showing our true emotions risks the loss of love, we choose attachment. We abandon ourselves to stay connected to others. And what happens to that abandoned self? It becomes the shadow. So here you are, an adult, functioning, smiling, maybe even succeeding. But deep down, there's a void, a feeling that something's missing, that you're not quite alive. That void is the shadow's fingerprint. You feel it in your avoidance, in your relationships, in the dreams you never chase, in the way you numb out, in the rage you suppress, in the tears you can't explain. You can call it anxiety. You can call it depression. You can call it a midlife crisis. But Jung would call it something else: a failure of integration. You've built a self on only half your psyche, and you wonder why it's collapsing. There's a moment in every life when the persona begins to crack, when the job, the partner, the coping mechanisms all stop working, when your strategies for survival become suffocating. That moment is terrifying, but it's also sacred. Because when the ego begins to break, the soul has a chance to speak. But you must listen. That requires a rare kind of courage, not the courage to fight the world, but the courage to turn inward and face the monsters you've named unacceptable. Jung didn't say, destroy your shadow. He said, integrate it. Make it conscious. Bring it into dialogue. Let it teach you. Because until you own your inner darkness, you'll keep projecting it onto others. That's the mechanism, the shadow you refuse to face in yourself. You will hate in others. You will attack it, fear it, judge it. But it was always you. The addict, the narcissist, the manipulator, the coward, the tyrant. All potential archetypes inside you, all waiting to be understood, not indulged, not excused, but integrated. And once you begin that process, something strange starts to happen. The inner chaos becomes less frightening. The nightmares lose their grip. You stop blaming the world for your suffering and begin to see the deeper architecture of your pain. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. But this is only the beginning. Because what you repress not only distorts your perception of yourself, it reshapes how you see the world. It governs your relationships, your politics, your spiritual life, your capacity for joy. The shadow is not a side note in the story of your life, it is the hidden author. And if you don't wrestle the pen from its hand, it will keep writing chapters you don't remember agreeing to live. The consequences of that are far more devastating than you realize. In the next chapter, we dive into those unseen consequences, the ways the shadow manipulates not just your inner life, but the very structure of society. The trap is deeper than you think. Are you ready to see how far it goes? You walk into a room and smile, but inside, you're screaming. You say you're fine, but something's hollow. People call you successful, accomplished, even admirable. And yet, when you lie awake at night, it feels like you're living someone else's life. That dissonance, that invisible split between how you live and who you are, that's your shadow pulling the strings. What you've buried doesn't just disappear. It festers. It reorganizes your emotional reality from behind the curtain. And the longer it remains unseen, the more subtly it sabotages everything you touch. Here's the truth no one wants to admit. Most people aren't choosing their life. They're reacting to what they haven't healed. Every decision, what job you pursue, who you date, what you tolerate, What you fear is filtered through unconscious beliefs formed by your repressed shadow. The anger you weren't allowed to express becomes passivity. The shame you never examined becomes perfectionism. The rejection you never healed becomes people-pleasing. You think you're in control, but really, you're living out a script written by the parts of you you've disowned. This is the real cost of unconsciousness. Neuroscience confirms what Jung intuited nearly a century ago. The majority of our behavior is driven not by rational thought, but by subconscious programming. We are pattern machines, and the patterns we form in childhood, especially around emotional expression and self-worth, become the blueprint for our adult existence. This is why shadow work isn't optional. It's foundational. Because what stays in the dark doesn't just haunt you, it becomes you. And not just individually, collectively. Society itself is a macrocosm of the individual psyche. And just as you project your disowned parts onto others, cultures do the same. Look around. The collective shadow is everywhere. We worship success, but fear vulnerability. We glorify light, but deny the dark. We talk about mindfulness, but ignore the rage and grief buried beneath the surface. We post affirmations, then silently spiral into self-loathing the moment no one's watching. We demonize the other, the poor, the addict, the mentally ill, the angry woman, the rebellious man, the immigrant, the one who doesn't fit. But these are projections. Society banishes what it fears, just like the psyche banishes what it cannot accept. And the result? A world of masks. Everyone pretending. Everyone suppressing. Everyone afraid of being seen for who they really are. Because we've mistaken wholeness for goodness. And that illusion is killing us. Shadow suppression breeds fragmentation. Fragmentation breeds anxiety, depression, alienation. We become disconnected from ourselves, each other, and the world. And then we seek to numb it. Alcohol, workaholism, overthinking, endless scrolling, performance-based relationships, hyper-productivity, toxic positivity, spiritual bypassing disguised as enlightenment. These aren't just bad habits. They're defense mechanisms, tools we use to avoid confronting the shadow. The irony? The more you run, the more control it gains. That's the trap. Your life might look peaceful on the surface, but inside, it's chaos. Emotional repression becomes chronic tension. Unexpressed grief becomes fatigue. Ignored anger becomes chronic illness. The body keeps the score, as Bessel van der Kolk famously wrote. And relationships? They become battlegrounds. The shadow doesn't stay quiet in love, it erupts. What you refuse to face within will magnetize itself in another. You'll attract partners who mirror your unresolved wounds. You'll recreate dynamics you swore you'd escape. You'll project, idealize, resent, sabotage. Why? Because your shadow isn't trying to destroy you. It's trying to be seen. And until it is, every connection will feel like war. Even spirituality isn't safe from the shadow's reach. In fact, the spiritual path might be the most dangerous hiding place of all. People chant, pray, meditate, yet still can't sit alone in silence, without drowning in self-loathing. They chase high vibes, but can't face their trauma. They speak of love and light, while silently rejecting their own humanity. Carl Jung warned of this. He saw how easily the ego can hijack spirituality to avoid the real work. Enlightenment, he said, doesn't come from imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Real transformation isn't a glow-up. It's a descent, a reckoning. a death and rebirth. And it always begins with the shadow. Because the longer you avoid it, the more distorted your perception becomes. You don't see reality as it is, you see it as you are. And if you are fragmented, rejected, and ashamed, you will see a world full of threat, judgment, and scarcity. This is the lens of the wounded ego, and it shapes everything: your creativity, your career, your worldview, even your capacity to feel joy. Yes, joy. Because here's a dark truth. You can't selectively numb emotions. When you suppress anger, you also dull passion. When you avoid grief, you limit your capacity for love. When you exile fear, you lose awe and wonder. The shadow isn't just the container of your pain. It's the key to your depth, which means the price of denying it isn't just suffering. It's flatness, numbness, a life lived in grayscale, where nothing quite reaches you. You don't just lose your darkness. You lose your aliveness. And this is where most people stop. They think the shadow is too heavy, too dark, too dangerous. But what if it isn't? What if the shadow is the doorway to everything you're missing? Not just healing, but wholeness. Not just self-awareness, but sovereignty. Not just coping, but becoming. Because only when you face what's hidden can you truly become who you are. Jung put it plainly: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So the question isn't whether you have a shadow. The question is whether you have the courage to meet it. And once you do, you begin to see the patterns, the projections, the unconscious scripts. You begin to reclaim your energy. You begin to remember the parts of yourself you thought were gone. This isn't easy, but it's necessary. Because until you do, the shadow will keep writing your story. And the cost of that is your life. But here's the miracle hidden in all this pain. There is a way out. A way to break the cycle, not by destroying the shadow, but by turning toward it, by listening, by integrating. In the next section, we begin the rebellion, the path of conscious transformation. The moment you stop running and start reclaiming, you wake up one morning and something's different. There's no external crisis, no heartbreak, no collapse, but you feel it, a quiet discontent, a whisper beneath the noise. This isn't who I am. That's how it begins, not with fire, but with friction. The subtle discomfort of wearing a mask that no longer fits. This is the moment the rebellion starts. But it's not a rebellion against society, your job, your family, or even the past. It's a rebellion against unconsciousness, against living a life dictated by everything you've hidden, feared, or refused to feel. The shadow was never your enemy. It was your compass. And now it's calling you home. Carl Jung didn't just diagnose the problem, he offered the cure. But it wasn't what people expected. No 5-step healing plan. No spiritual bypass. Just this: integration. Not exorcism. Integration. You don't get rid of your shadow. You invite it to the table. You don't fight it. You listen. You don't fix it. You befriend it. And in doing so, you discover something radical. You were never broken, just divided. The war was never between good and evil. It was between the self you perform and the self you've abandoned. So how do you begin? Not by pretending you're fearless, but by becoming intimate with your fear. Not by striving for perfection, but by getting curious about your shame. The rebellion begins with honesty. Brutal, tender, unfiltered honesty. Here's what that looks like. You notice when you're triggered, and instead of blaming, you ask, What part of me feels threatened? What am I protecting? What memory lives here? You recognize when you're numbing, and instead of judging, you ask, what am I afraid to feel? What would happen if I just sat with it? You stop performing wholeness and start practicing it. And yes, it's terrifying. Because for the first time, you're not running. You're remembering. This process, this return, is what Jung called individuation. It's not self-improvement. It's self-retrieval. You stop outsourcing your worth. You stop projecting your wounds. You stop living as a fragment and start living as a whole. And this wholeness, it changes everything. You begin to notice the masks others wear, the roles they play, the pain they carry. And instead of reacting, you respond. Instead of judging, you hold space. Instead of collapsing, you rise. Because now you know their behavior isn't about you. It's about their own exiled shadow. And you've met yours. But here's the paradox. To reclaim your power, you must first feel powerless. To access your strength, you must touch your sorrow. To awaken your truth, you must descend into silence. This is the hero's journey. Not slaying the dragon, but realizing the dragon was you, all along. You carry within you every archetype. The wounded child, the tyrant, the lover, the liar, the savior, the addict, the artist, the rebel. And when you stop denying them, they stop controlling you. You don't become someone else. You become more of yourself. Not a perfected self, but an authentic one. This is not a path of light. It's a path of integration, and it demands everything from you. It asks you to give up safety, for freedom, certainty, for truth, comfort, for aliveness. But in return, it gives you something most people will never taste. Sovereignty, not power over others. Power over your own story. You're no longer acting out inherited scripts. You're no longer sleepwalking through patterns that were never yours. You are now the author. This is the essence of shadow alchemy, turning what once hurt you into what now heals you, transforming what once controlled you into what now empowers you. Your rage becomes your boundary. Your grief becomes your depth. Your fear becomes your clarity. Your shame becomes your compass. Think of the greatest minds who shaped human evolution. They didn't avoid their shadow. They became intimate with it. Carl Jung, wrestling with his inner madness. Nietzsche, walking through the abyss of meaninglessness. Viktor Frankl, forging purpose from the ashes of Auschwitz. They didn't transcend their darkness. They walked through it and emerged with truth. This is your inheritance too. But to claim it, you must be willing to lose who you thought you were. That's the death, the ego unraveling, the surrender of your false self. And it hurts, but only everything that isn't real. Now imagine this. You walk into a room not to perform, not to hide, not to manipulate, but simply to be. You speak from the gut. You listen from the soul. You move through life without the invisible armor you once needed just to survive. People sense something in you, something raw, alive, unshakable. Not because you're perfect, but because you're whole. You've stopped running from the parts of you that were too much, too intense, too wild, too emotional. You've welcomed them back, and in doing so, you've become more human than ever. That's the power of shadow integration. It doesn't make you superhuman. It makes you real. And in a world built on illusion, real is revolutionary. So no, this journey isn't easy, but it's sacred. And every time you choose truth over performance, Every time you pause instead of react. Every time you say, "This is mine. I will not pass it on." You're not just healing yourself. You're breaking a cycle. You are becoming the first domino that falls in a new direction. A lineage of consciousness rooted in self-ownership. You are the rebellion, and the world needs it more than ever. But there's still one final layer. One truth that redefines everything. That takes this journey from psychological to spiritual. Because while the shadow holds your wounds, it also holds your genius. And once you realize that once you touch the power beneath the pain, you'll never see yourself the same again. In the final section, we unveil that truth. The ultimate realization Carl Jung hinted at but rarely said aloud. Get ready to see not just who you are, but what you truly carry. What if I told you that the part of you you've spent your whole life hiding, the part you were most ashamed of, the part that made you feel unworthy, broken, too much, or not enough, was never your weakness? What if that was the very place your genius was buried? You see, the final revelation isn't that the shadow must be accepted. It's that the shadow is the source of your deepest power. And no one tells you that, because most people never go deep enough to find out. They spend their lives trying to be good, trying to be light, trying to be loved. But Jung saw through the illusion. He knew. The gold you're searching for isn't in your perfection. It's in your ruin. That's the alchemy. The one truth most are too afraid to face. Your shadow is not just the container of your darkness. It is the cradle of your divinity. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast ocean. It's pitch black. You can't see the bottom. You're afraid to enter. That's your unconscious. But as you slowly begin to descend through grief, fear, rage, shame, you start to notice something. Buried beneath the guilt, empathy. Behind the fear, vision. Inside your rage, boundaries. Within your shame, purpose. And at the very core of your shadow is your unique fingerprint on reality. Your soul's power. Your sacred voice. The gift only you can bring to this world. And the tragedy? Most people die with it still buried. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But you cannot become who you are until you've faced who you're not. You are not your mask, not your trauma, not your conditioning, not the story you inherited, not the fear you swallowed, not the lie you told yourself to survive. You are what remains after all of that is stripped away. And what remains is not tame. The full integration of the shadow doesn't make you polite. It makes you powerful. Not the kind of power that dominates, the kind that liberates. Because now, nothing controls you. You're not performing for approval. You're not hiding for safety. You're not manipulating for connection. You're not abandoning yourself to be chosen. You're whole, and wholeness cannot be coerced. That's what makes it dangerous. That's why the world fears it. Because a whole human cannot be sold an identity. They already own their truth. Think about the greatest artists, healers, creators, and revolutionaries. Where did their magic come from? From the same place as yours. The wound. Van Gogh painted from madness. Frida Kahlo painted from pain. James Baldwin wrote from fire. Martin Luther King Jr.'b spoke from soul. They didn't become great by avoiding their shadow. They channeled it. Their greatness was forged through their suffering, not despite it. And this isn't just poetic. It's neurological. Your brain stores emotional trauma in the limbic system, the same system responsible for intuition, creativity, and connection. Meaning, your deepest pain is wired directly to your deepest wisdom. You don't just heal for yourself. You heal to access your brilliance. Jung called this the gold in the shadow. He said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Light isn't something you become. It's something you uncover. You were never meant to be good. You were meant to be real. And once you access that realness, your entire life begins to shift. You stop attracting people who mirror your unconscious wounds. You stop chasing validation that never satisfied you. You stop fearing rejection because you're no longer rejecting yourself. You stop trying to fix others because you're too busy honoring your own evolution. You become undeniable, not perfect, not pure, undeniable. And the world feels it. But with this power comes responsibility, because now you see through the veil. You see how society rewards suppression and punishes authenticity. You see how your culture celebrates superficial light while demonizing real depth. You see how most people are terrified of their own soul. And you now walk a different path. The path of the integrated, the awake, the luminous in the dark. You are no longer at war with yourself, so you can no longer be controlled. This is the final threat, and the final gift. Now imagine this. You look back on your life not with regret, but with reverence. Every breakdown had a message. Every failure was initiation. Every heartbreak was holy. Every shadow was sacred. You were never lost. You were being led. You were never broken. You were being revealed. You didn't waste years running, numbing, hiding. You were collecting pieces of your soul. And now, finally, they're home. So let me ask you this. What have you hidden from yourself? What emotion have you disowned? What part of you have you locked away, convinced it was unworthy of the light? Because that is where your gold is buried. Not in who you think you should be, but in everything you were once ashamed to feel. That's the secret Jung knew. That's the revolution he started. That's the power he left us. Not to transcend the shadow, but to become it fully. And in doing so, become whole. You're not here to be liked. You are here to wake up, to reclaim your essence, to walk through fire, naked and unashamed, to look your shadow in the eyes and say, "I see you. You are mine. Let's create something beautiful." And from that moment on, you no longer live a half-life. You are no longer divided. You become what you always were underneath it all. Free.